For those of you that may or may not know, I am a pretty big Doctor Who fan. When the show was brought back from the dead in 2005, thanks to Russell T Davies, 7-year-old me was immediately hooked, and somehow I've managed to stick with the show since then despite its many ups and downs. Now, as most of you are probably aware, we recently said goodbye to the 13th Doctor played by Jodie Whittaker and are about to head into a second era of Russell T Davies as the showrunner, which is kind of unheard of in Doctor Who. It's the first time a showrunner has actually come back to take control of the show again. So considering we've just seen a Doctor regenerate and we're about to kind of go full circle with the showrunner, I thought it would make perfect sense for me to review every series of Doctor Who that we've had so far, from 2005 to now. Also, quick disclaimer in regards to the specials that are scattered throughout the 13 series. The Christmas specials, we're just counting them as part of whatever season they fall under. But the kind of one-off specials, like the David Tennant ones that ended his run, or the Day of the Doctor, or the Jodie Whittaker ones that we've just had quite recently, they're being counted as their own separate things, so I will talk about them as their own standalone things, separate from the seasons. So, with all that being said, let's start with Series 1, which I personally think is a really solid start for the show, and is also just a generally good introduction and reintroduction for the show. It works for people that have never seen Doctor Who before, but it also works as a reintroduction of certain things that old fans can latch back onto. One of the biggest highlights of this series is Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor. There is a certain anger and weariness to his Doctor that we don't really see as much with the other Doctors that we get afterwards, and is something that's kind of wholly unique to his Doctor. We get it a little bit with Tennant, but in terms of going all out, Eccleston really does deliver on those two things. And I really do miss his Doctor. I wish we did see more of him, and it's a shame we only did just get the one series, but that being said, he really does make it work in his own unique way. In terms of the quality of the series and the episodes within it, I think it's a perfectly fine series. That's not to say it's bad, far from it, but there are quite a few episodes here that are, in my opinion, straight up forgettable. Specifically The Long Game and Boomtown. Within the context of the series, and as you're watching them, they are fine episodes, but in the long run, I genuinely don't remember much about them. That being said, you do get some genuinely great episodes here and there, like Dalek is genuinely one of the best Dalek stories in recent Who, in my opinion. You get the Empty Child two-parter, which is still incredibly chilling to watch to this day, and you get the Parting of the Ways two-parter at the end, which is a really fitting send-off for this series and also Christopher Eccleston's Doctor. Unfortunately though, there are certain elements in Series 1 that have not aged particularly well, and I'm not just talking about the CGI and the effects, which sometimes they look really good, but other times do look rather dated. But there are also some moments where even the dialogue is rather dated as well. Like, it was fine for 2005, but if you tried writing certain things like that now, you wouldn't get away with it. Now on to Series 2, which is David Tennant's first full series as the Doctor, and overall I think this is a bit of an improvement over Series 1. Again, I'm not saying that Series 1 is bad by any means, but just in terms of the production value, the performances, the writing, and just the overall tone of Series 2, it just overall feels like they saw what worked from the first series and just kind of upped the ante in this second one. And I think most of that is down to the fact that Series 1 was them playing it rather safe. And again, I don't mean that as a negative. They genuinely didn't know if Series 1 was going to work or not, or whether it was going to be a hit. That's kind of the reason why the entirety of Series 1 takes place on Earth in some shape or form. Every episode in Series 1 either takes place in Earth's past, in Earth's future, or on a space station orbiting the Earth. However, because Series 1 was the massive success it was, they could kind of do whatever they wanted with Series 2, and it shows, because tonally, Series 2 feels a lot more playful and less restricted than Series 1 was, and I definitely think that is a positive where Series 2 and all the other seasons after this are concerned. The overall quality of Series 2 is genuinely really good, and like I said, is mostly an improvement over the first series. You get some really great episodes like The Girl in the Fireplace, the Satan Pit two-parter, and especially the Doomsday finale two-parter, which is still heartbreaking to watch every single time I watch it. There are a few missteps here and there, like Fear Her and Love and Monsters, which everybody seems to bang on about how bad they are. I don't think they're terrible episodes, like I will happily watch them, but it's definitely not the show's highest point, that's for sure. But as it is, Series 2 is genuinely pretty damn good, and Series 3 is also pretty good as well. This one has kind of grown on me more over time. When it first aired, I thought the series was fine. There are a few major standout episodes in this series that kind of overshadow Series 3 as a whole, which I think is why it's taken a while to grow on me as a whole series, because you get episodes like Blink and the Human Nature Family of Blood two-parter, which are just so immensely good that unfortunately the rest of the series kind of falls short a little bit in terms of quality. And that's not to say the rest of the series is bad. You do get some really solid episodes throughout this series, but because you have such great, brilliantly written episodes like Blink and like the Family of Blood two-parter, and even the 3-part finale with Utopia and The Sound of Drums, that's also a really solid finale as well. That unfortunately kind of overshadows this series, which is a shame because you do get some other really good episodes here as well. Especially Smith and Jones, the opening episode of the series, I think is a kind of underrated episode, if in my opinion. It's a really good introduction to Martha as a companion, who again is a companion that has grown on me more over time. When I first saw her in the show, I didn't know what to make of her character, but I kind of like the approach that they've taken with her character, specifically in Series 3. And then we have Series 4, which is up there with another series that we're going to talk about very soon, as one of my favourite seasons of the show, full stop. Series 4 does so much really well, the main one being the reintroduction of Donna from The Runaway Bride. Now, when she was in that episode, I thought she was an okay one-off companion, but what they do with her in Series 4, again, similar to what they did with Martha, they kind of give her her own personality and make her stand out amongst most of the other companions that you've seen before, but most of the other companions you will see afterwards as well. However, it's not just the brilliance of Donna that makes Series 4 as good as it is. The quality of Series 4 in terms of the writing and the episodes in it is probably the strongest you're going to get in the entirety of New Who. Bar that other series that we're going to talk about in a second, Series 4 is just incredibly good from start to finish. You get a great opening episode with Partners in Crime, you get a really thought-provoking episode with The Fires of Pompeii. You get these two really fun episodes in the middle of the series with The Doctor's Daughter and The Unicorn and the Wasp. But then you get probably the best continuous run of episodes in the whole of new Doctor Who. You get the Silence in the Library two-parter, immediately followed by Midnight, one of my favourite Doctor Who episodes, full stop. Then after that is then followed by Turn Left and the Journey's End two-parter, which is very fan servicey, but is one of my favourite season's finales of the entirety of New Who. Just that entire run from the Silence in the Library to Journey's End is just mind-blowingly good, and I would not have it any other way. And then unfortunately we have to say goodbye to David Tennant's Doctor with a series of specials that I think aired between 2008 and 2009. And again, they kind of vary in quality. You get The Next Doctor, which is a fun little romp of a Christmas episode. Then you get The Planet of the Dead, which, despite including Lee Evans and Daniel Kaluuya, isn't particularly a great episode. it's not awful, but it's just not very memorable in the grand scheme of things. And considering it has those two people in it, you would think it would be more memorable, but it isn't. You then have The Waters of Mars, which genuinely scarred me as a kid, and you obviously have The End of Time Parts 1 and 2, which breaks my heart every time I watch it. Like, literally, I've watched it so many times, and I cry like a baby at the end every single time. And now we move on to Series 5, the first full series of Matt Smith as the Doctor, and this is the other series that I was referring to in regards to it being one of my favourite seasons of New Who, up there with Series 4. Series 5 had a lot of work to do because the back end of the David Tennant run was so popular and was so good, especially with that fourth series, that a lot of people, myself included, were not quite sure whether Stephen Moffat and Matt Smith were going to carry over that same level of quality that we got right at the end of David Tennant's run. But thankfully, Moffat and Smith just take what they know works and just kind of do their own thing for Series 5, and it pays off because Series 5 is an incredibly strong series from start to finish and is one of the few seasons of Doctor Who that genuinely works as kind of its own standalone season, because with the entirety of the Russell T Davies run is he would set up like this singular thing that would kind of reoccur in a couple of episodes here and there and then would pay off in the finale, and he kind of rinsed and repeat that throughout all of the series that he did. Moffat does something similar in Series 5 and pretty much all of his other series as well, but the difference between how Moffat approaches it and how Davies approaches it is that Moffat actually makes a compelling and interesting overarching story from those little ideas that carries on throughout the whole series. Whereas, say for example in Series 1, it was just the words bad wolf being mentioned here and there, and by the end of it you're just like, oh, that's what it means. With Moffat, you instead get these cracks that appear all over time and space, and you're not 100% sure what they're there for or why they're there. And rather than it just being, oh, there's a crack, oh, there's another crack, and that's kind of it, he instead plants little threads here and there on top of that original idea that he had, and it kind of builds up to the point that when it is paid off in the finale, which is a great series finale as well, it all kind of makes sense, and it gives Series 5 a lot of rewatch value because there are small little things here and there that really pay off if you've been watching really carefully. On top of that, the quality of the episodes as a whole is just also really good. So that then moves us on to Series 6, which for me personally is where the cracks were starting to form in terms of Moffat being the showrunner. That's not to say Series 6 is bad by any means, it's actually a pretty decent series from start to finish. But that being said, there are still a few things here and there that kind of drag Series 6 down in quality, especially considering how good Series 5 was. Series 6 tries to do what the previous series was doing in terms of having a continuous story arc in the background whilst all these standalone episodes are happening. But unfortunately, even though it starts off really strongly with The Impossible Astronaut and The Day of the Moon, which I think are two genuinely great episodes, it isn't as interesting or as investing as the overarching story was in Series 5. And I think the reason the overarching story in Series 6 doesn't work as well as it did in the previous series is because the setup in the first two episodes is so unbelievably strong that as it keeps going, the payoff just gets more and more underwhelming, which then obviously moves us on to Series 7, which again feels like another downgrade compared to the last series. Series 7 isn't awful, but it's not particularly great either, and I think the biggest issue this series has is that when it aired, and also when you're viewing it, it feels like two separate seasons kind of plonked together. because the first half of the series focuses on what we've already been established. It's the Doctor with Rory and Amy doing stuff, and then halfway through the series they just go. And I feel like that's one of the biggest issues of the series. They could have stretched it out a little bit more and had them last till the end of the series, or get rid of them in the previous series. Even though their send-off is really strong, like the episode where they go, the Angels Take Manhattan, is a really good episode, but it just doesn't feel right just being plonked halfway through a series. And then on top of that, the second half of the series is you trying to get used to this new companion, Clara. And again, because you've only got half a series to get used to her, it doesn't feel right. If you have a whole series to get used to her, it makes more sense, and you get more time with her as the companion. But because you only get a couple of episodes, it feels a bit weird, especially considering how high the stakes get towards the end of Series 7. It just feels a bit weird and almost a little bit rushed. That being said, Series 7 does end on a really strong note, and it leads up to probably one of my favourite things to ever exist in Doctor Who, and that is the Day of the Doctor, which is the feature-length 50th anniversary special featuring Matt Smith, David Tennant and John Hurt as the War Doctor. There isn't much I can say about Day of the Doctor that hasn't already been said. It's a little bit fan servicey, but considering it's the 50th anniversary special of the show, and it's telling a story that is very important to specifically the entire existence of the newest run of Doctor Who, I think it does its job incredibly well, and just as a standalone story, it is really well done. I think it's one of Moffat's best written stories during his time as showrunner. And again, there was a lot at stake considering this was the 50th special, but I think he did a really good job. The stakes are high in this episode, but it never feels like it's going too overboard at any point. There is a lot of the episode feels rather grounded as well, which I think is a very interesting move for a 50th anniversary special. But seeing John Hurt, David Tennant and Matt Smith interact with one another is always a blessing to see, and again I think that aspect is done really well in this episode as well. After the Day of the Doctor, we then get a bloated but rather well-deserved send-off to Matt Smith's Doctor, which is then followed by Series 8, the first full series of Peter Capaldi's Doctor, and it's fine. That's kind of all I've got to say about Series 8. It's not offensively bad, but nothing particularly stands out in this series either. There are some really good episodes towards the back end of Series 8, like Flatline, Mummy on the Orient Express, or even the two-part finale where we get Missy coming into her own. I really like those string of episodes, but unfortunately everything else just doesn't really do it for me. I mean, you got the Robot of Sherwood, which is okay. Like, it's a fun, rompy adventure sort of episode. But you got to be in a specific type of mood to watch it. Then you have Series 9, which, again, is just sort of there. I don't have much to say about Series 9. It was an interesting idea for them to do the series as mostly multiple part stories. Like, I think there's only one standalone story in this series. Everything else is like a two-parter or a three-parter, which I think is an interesting idea that we haven't really seen done since classic Doctor Who. So I think the fact that Series 9 goes for that approach, I think is very interesting. Whether it pays off is up for debate, because you get the Magician's Apprentice two-parter, which is a pretty good story, but it's just a weird choice as a series opener. You get the Before the Flood two-parter, which is okay. You get the weird two-part story with Maisie Williams' character, which I'm not a fan of that character and that story. it just didn't work for me. When I heard Maisie Williams was going to be in the show, I was really excited because I like her as an actress. Unfortunately, I did not care for her character. I did not care for how they handled her character, and just overall, it didn't need to be there. I just kind of thought it was a little bit pointless. And that's when we get Series 10, which is actually pretty decent for what it's worth. It's way better than it has any right to be, especially considering the very gradual downhill trajectory we've had with Series 7, 8 and 9. Series 10 is actually not that bad. We're introduced to a new companion this time called Bill, who I actually really like. I know a friend of mine is not a massive fan of Bill, but I actually quite like her. And yeah, a lot of the episodes in this series are pretty decent. Again, they're nothing mind-blowing, but for what it's worth, they're pretty good episodes. You get a few standouts like Oxygen and the pilot, and especially the two-part finale that ends this series, which is probably my favourite season finale of Doctor Who since Series 5. It's an incredibly strong story that just wraps up Capaldi's run in a really touching and quite heartbreaking way as well. And I also prefer this as an ending to his Doctor compared to what we got with Twice Upon a Time. I don't think Twice Upon a Time is awful, I just think it's a bit overlong and a bit egocentric, whereas the ending to Series 10 is a nice, cohesive end for his Doctor, and I kind of wish he'd regenerated there instead of at the end of that special. Then we get Series 11, which is the first full series of Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor. Now, I have already reviewed Series 11 and Series 12 on this channel before, so I'm not going to spend too much time going into these two seasons, but I'm going to give my brief overview on them anyway, because for the sake of the video, it makes sense. I'm just going to straight up say it. Series 11 is my least favourite series of the entirety of New Who. That's not because of Jodie Whittaker though. I think she is really good as the Doctor, not just in this series, but throughout her entire run. The main issue is Chris Chibnall as the showrunner. The main issue I have with Series 11, and you can kind of say the same about Series 12 as well, is the fact that everything is dumbed down. When there is a scenario, or the Doctor is trying to figure something out, or when the companions are trying to help the Doctor, everything is just dumbed down to the point where it's actually kind of painful to watch as an audience member. Because at least with the previous eras that we've had, whether it's the Davis era or the Moffat era, they treated the writing in a way that respected you as an audience member. You were there alongside the Doctor trying to figure it out, and the story was going at a pace that benefited that approach. Chibnall's approach to writing Doctor Who, on the other hand, is to have a story where you as the audience can kind of already see where it's going to go anyway, but then when the episode decides to explain everything to you, it explains it so much and spoon feeds everything that it feels like it's talking down to you a little bit. Like, I realise Doctor Who is a family-oriented show, but you don't have to talk to us like the kids. We can figure it out for ourselves, and to be honest, the way the majority of Chibnall's episodes do play out, we kind of already have figured it out halfway through the episode, so you don't need to explain it to us the way that you do. Series 12, thankfully, is a bit of an improvement over Series 11. I think the main thing they learnt from the previous series is that Series 11 were all standalone episodes. There wasn't really an overarching story except for one thing that showed up in the first episode and then was kind of resolved in the last one. In Series 12, you do have standalone episodes like you usually do, but there is this overarching story that keeps you intrigued till the end, and I like that with Series 12. It's not handled that well, but it's a welcome addition. The overall quality of some of the episodes feels like a bit of an improvement as well. You get a really solid opening two-parter with Spyfall, you get a really fun episode in the middle with Fugitive of the Jadoon, and Haunting of Villa Diodati is just a genuinely creepy and just really well done episode from start to finish. I just really like that episode. Unfortunately though, Series 12 holds the singular worst episode in the entirety of New Who. That episode is called Orphan 55. Now, I don't hate this episode for the reason most other people hate it, which is the rather awkwardly fisted message at the end about climate change. That's not the reason I hate it. It's not well handled, but trust me, there are so many things I do not like about this episode. Thankfully though, that then moves us on to Series 13, also known as Flux. And even though this series isn't perfect, I definitely think this is the best standalone series Chibnall has done in his entire run. Like I said, it's not perfect, but again, the quality of episodes is an improvement over the last two series. The overarching story of this series, being the Flux, is an interesting one that again is not handled particularly great in places, but is enough to keep you invested, especially considering the amount of episodes you get in Series 13 is a lot less than we've had in any of the previous seasons. So it's enough to keep you engaged for that short period of time. That being said, I feel like Flux could have benefited from an extra few episodes just to flesh out characters and concepts and ideas. Just a couple of episodes could have helped, but I understand because of COVID and restrictions and writing struggles, they had to condense it to the episodes that they had, so that makes sense. I just wish it had been stretched out a little bit more. After Series 13, we then got 3 specials to round off Jodie Whittaker's run as the Doctor. We got Eve of the Daleks, which is without a doubt the best Dalek story during Chibnall's run. It's a very interesting concept of the characters being stuck in a time loop that I'm surprised that Doctor Who hasn't done more often. Then you have Legend of the Sea Devils, which is a bit shit. Not in terms of just the story, but everything about this episode just kind of falls flat on its face. The effects are probably the worst I've seen in a long time. The story is crap. It's not a good episode. It just really isn't. It's just there. And I kind of forgot how bad it was until I came to do this video. And now that I'm recalling it for the sake of this video, I'm just kind of saying to myself, oh yeah, that episode was pretty bad, wasn't it? Thankfully though, Jodie Whittaker's last episode, which is the most recent to date, being The Power of the Doctor, which is this feature-length, hour-and-a-half long special to commemorate not just her leaving, but also 100 years of the BBC, is really good. It might actually be my favourite episode of Chibnall's entire run. And there are so many reasons as to why Power of the Doctor works. There are a lot of things in the episode that don't work when you kind of stop to think about it, but in terms of just pure, entertaining Doctor Who story, Power of the Doctor just gives you that. I think the reason Power of the Doctor works as well as it does is because throughout the previous 3 series, Chibnall has set up so much baggage for himself that he's kind of pushed himself into a corner. He's set up all these polarizing things and all these elements that still haven't had a decent explanation to them that, again, he's pushed himself into a corner. And he had 2 options with The Power of the Doctor. He could have spent an hour and a half explaining all these loose threads that he's set up, and it kind of would have made for a bit of a lackluster send-off for Jodie Whittaker. The other option, which he ended up doing for Power of the Doctor, is just to throw all that baggage out the window and just go, right, this is Jodie's last hurrah as the Doctor. I'm going to make this as bonkers and as entertaining as I can and just tell a coherent, fun story that just does her Doctor justice. And in terms of what he was going for, I think he succeeded. So that is my review of every series of Doctor Who from 2005 to now. If you are a fan of Doctor Who, let me know in the comments what your favourite series or episodes are. I'd love to have a discussion in the comments about that. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye.